you don't move forward until you really believe in the plan. And it needs to be a plan that has legs too. It can't be a plan that is a snapshot of you today. It has to be a plan that has a structure that you could continually add your new projects to. So it needs to be able to really be program in motion. And you figure that every 5 years, you're going to have to redo that.
Welcome to another episode of the Flywheel Effect. My name's Matt Bernath, and today, missing but here in spirit, is my co-host, Brent Sonic Schmeltz. And we are sponsored, as always, by Vital. Vital and their team help luxury home service business owners build businesses they love that provide time and money freedom. And today, with me for real, not just in spirit, is Stewart Cohen, who leads a boutique production company dedicated to delivering exceptional work and creating enjoyable, productive client experiences. He's passionate about the power of images and video and marketing and brand identity, and he brings the same energy and attention to detail to every project, whether it's a large-scale TV production or an intimate still shoot. Stewart thrives on collaboration, driven by a deep curiosity about his clients' stories and commitment to exceeding their expectations, building lasting partnerships along the way. Welcome, Stewart. So glad you could join us today.
Thanks so much, Matt. That was actually a pretty great introduction. I appreciate it.
You made it easy on us. You give us the goods, we deliver the goods.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. So where are you joining us from today?
I'm actually sitting in Dallas, Texas, which is where I currently live. I'm a Canadian living in Texas, and yeah, it's working, although it's getting to be a little toasty down here.
Oh, man, I bet. So whereabouts in Canada are you from?
From Montreal. Grew up playing hockey and came down to the States to go to college and never left.
Got it. Okay. Wonderful. So Montreal relocated to Texas. Where did you end up going to college?
Came down to go to University of Texas at Austin.
Okay. So truly from Canada straight to Texas, haven't left.
No, I mean, I left after school and moved around, and I worked for different people, and lived in LA for a little while, going to film school, and went to Chicago for a little while. But for the most part, my adult life it's been pretty much in Dallas. And I always say that I ended up here because it was really reasonable to live here. You could live well, and we were one direct flight away from anywhere, being in Dallas with our airport. And, so it's really worked for me in that we work all over the country, and actually a lot all over the world, and pretty much from DFW, we could get anywhere. And I still use that excuse because it is easy. We're right in the middle of the country, so it makes it easy.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there are a lot of people in our industry, many other industries, who kind of have that, I don't want to say love-hate relationship with DFW or Dallas, but it truly is. It is one of the most central places in the country, so it makes sense to have conventions and gatherings there. But boy, that airport sometimes can just be a bear.
So the difference is, and I always say this: people who connect through Dallas hate it, and I don't blame them. But to live here, the way the terminals are set up, it is so quick and easy. Believe it or not, you're dropped off right by your gate, and you could come out right by your gate. But yeah, no, connecting here could be tough, and actually, it's about to get worse because they're building another new terminal.
Oh man, I don't want to hear that. We're moving our daughter into Ole Miss this year, so she's our first college kid. Actually, about a month from now, and we were back there in June for orientation, and we have to fly through, from Orange County through Dallas to Memphis, and then drive an hour to the school. So everything went well on the way out there. On the way home, apparently you guys had, I don't know, an hour's worth of thunderstorms that destroyed everything. And so for the first time ever, and by the way, like you, I travel a whole bunch. For the first time ever in my traveling career, I had to do an overnight with no luggage. So I'm super grateful that was my first time. But it is a very awkward situation when you go to shower in the morning and you have to put the same dirty clothes on that you had from the day before, right?
Yeah. Especially if they don't have a toothbrush at the front desk.
Right. Yeah, there's so many variables there that just don't play in your favor. But I'll tell you what, we survived. actually, the other thing I'm grateful for is because my daughter was with us through that experience, she saw what can go wrong because she's going to be doing that travel on her own and she's just barely 18. And, kids these days, for better or for worse, they don't see the same kind of challenges that we do or we did, growing up
Right.
in our world. So it was an interesting challenge for her. She hit the roof and then she came down and it was all good. But
Well, actually, so we have somebody on our staff here that is a Ole Miss graduate. So if she needs any advice, just we can connect them.
oh, that's awesome. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Well, so tell us a little bit, Stuart. Our audience, as we talked about, they're luxury home service companies, and so they work on luxury homes, doing anything from home technology to pools to cabinetry and all kinds of stuff in luxury homes. And as I read through your bio and read it to the audience, that may or may not have landed for them. So let's talk about what you do and how that impacts companies and businesses large and small across the country.
Sure. And I thought about it since I know exactly who your audience is, and I've listened to a bunch of the episodes, which, by the way, I thought were great, and I learned a lot about myself listening to them. But what we do is we're a production company that I started out just doing still photography way back when, and started doing TV commercials like again way back when. But my whole goal was really to do both for clients. So we service corporations and ad agencies and that kind of level of clientele, and it's a very high demanding, high end. I tried to put myself at the high end of the food chain, so you're not the cheapest for sure, but you really have to deliver really quality work. And I think it aligns with your listeners who work on high end homes, and when you get into that, you're working with the top 5%, it's got to be really good.
Yeah. I love that. When we were talking earlier, you connected the dots on exactly that and some of the takeaways that you got from our podcast, which of course isn't directly related to your industry, but you said, hey, we are servicing that high end and, the pricing piece, the quality piece, it's all relative.
And I think so. The thing that's interesting listening to your podcast and some others is the business experience, whether you start to realize who you are in the realm of businesses, and it's a universal experience whether you're creating TV commercials or building homes. I mean, there is if you're a small business owner and grossing within a certain amount of money, you're going to have the same experience regardless. And you don't have that big Fortune 500 company safety net type thing.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, since you've listened to a number of our episodes, we kind of sometimes get dirty. We kind of sometimes get vulnerable. So hopefully you're prepared for that today.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit first on, like, how did you get into this? What turned you on initially about still photography, and talk a little bit about that journey that led you here, I guess from the frame of what you're passionate about.
Well, truly, growing up, I had worldly parents, but we did not travel a lot. I will say that. And when I started to get interested in stills, at least, it was through photos that, it was still back in the day of magazines, and you saw pictures of exotic places that I couldn't believe existed. And when I got out of school, I worked as an apprentice to some name photographers, and we got to travel all over the world and meet some really interesting people. And I've always been a real fan of people and their stories, and because everybody has a story, a great story, regardless of what it is. And so I really became a lover of meeting different people and going weird places, and that's how I got into it. And then I put together some pictures, and I started just selling, hustling, and you know I had some luck, but also I was pretty tenacious. And once I had a client, I kind of stick with them. We deliver solid goods always, and I always stand by everything we deliver. And I think, over time, the reputation grew and referrals grew, and nationally and internationally. And, we still stood by doing quality work.
Got it. But what I learned from reading about you and your history and the work that you do is you're very passionate about storytelling, right?
I
So talk to me about the power of storytelling, because I think that makes the difference between a good quality campaign and an amazing one, right? So let's spend some time on storytelling. First off, what is it, right? For those of us who may not be totally engaged with it, it feels like we're going to be on the receiving end of a great story, but what about on the creation side of storytelling? Tell us about what that's like.
Well, I think so much of storytelling we take for granted in our heads. Like I don't know your whole story, right? And it's in your head. You know where you came from, how you got here. But the truth is, people are really interested in it. And especially, not only the bright and shiny stuff, sometimes it's the hard times that help define who you are as a person. And every good story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And I think, especially in the marketing and advertising world these days, people want to hear about who you are and how you got here and why you got here. And in the context of say, a luxury home builder, it's like, so where are those ideas coming from? And what makes you think that these cabinets will be right for me? And it's somewhere in your back history there. And I think if somehow, as us, especially as small businesses, could get our story out to the world and people can identify with you, I think there's an immediate, what's the word? An immediate connection. And I think good storytelling also has a level of authenticity, which makes people realize that you're not just full of hot air and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, people buy from people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As much as we've gone through periods in the ad world, marketing world, where we don't think that, it really is the case. Especially at the smaller level,
I think that's especially true, like you just brought up, for local businesses or creative type businesses. I mean, when you think about it, the luxury home service world, whether it's technology, cabinetry, pool, whatever, you hit the nail on the head. It's about creativity that comes from some basis in someone's story. So
Right.
so let's dive a little bit deeper into that story, because I think that's where our viewers and listeners can have some takeaways. It can sound daunting to try to document your story and or tell your story, especially if it's not your level of expertise, right? Because storytelling, I mean, truly the best storytellers out there are the ones who do this for a living. They're creating scripts and storyboards and all the stuff that you do so well. How might a small business start with storytelling?
Well, I think, use an outside source for one, because you would write something down and you write what comes to the top of your head. If somebody was delving into your questions and helping you craft your story, it helps because you get an objective view of your experiences. Sometimes the most mundane things that we think are mundane things are actually important to your customers or your story, really. A mundane thing about, not getting accepted into your first 5 schools or getting rejected, like your sale rate is 1 in 20. You might think that's just horrifying and you never want to talk about it again, but it probably helps define who you are, and you hone your craft and your story every time you go to the next one. And also, I think your story, like, it's up to us to expand our stories. It's like, with me, okay, I love to travel, but initially you don't realize of the knowledge you bring back when you're interacting with different cultures and different people and different architecture. And so you're rounding out your knowledge base that you could help other people use then. You have that basis of it. And if you think about a home builder and you think about travel and you think about loving architecture or something like that, seeing how homes are built in the UK or homes are built in Switzerland, into the sides of cliffs, could definitely open your mind into how you may build a house in Dallas, Texas, so I think And it's just an innate knowledge you get. I mean, we're sponges, and I think it's up to us to continually try to learn. And I think some of it happens just by being, it's not like you're going to school or studying or stuff like that. But, just, and I found that personally, I found that by traveling, that helps a lot because you get out of your own head, you get out of your own space, and everything is a new experience.
I love that. So what I picked up from you there is that the more authentic you tell your story, the good stuff, the maybe not so good stuff, but also the things you might feel are mundane, the travel, or many other things, including that in your story because it drives the connection with who you are and what you do.
Exactly. And just say, for instance, like last night, I was out with an old client who was leaving a job with a bunch of his workmates from a big Fortune 500 company. And we were talking about short films and stories. And I threw down some ideas of things I was thinking about. And of course, they were in hysterics. And I'm like, dude, and he was like, no, that's just the way his head thinks, And I think, everybody, you just have to be okay with whatever's going through your head, and hopefully it's PG at least, but the stories that I get from individuals I meet, wherever they may be down the street in Dallas, Texas, or they may be in California, New York, or Djibouti, whatever. Everybody's got a crazy story, and and you have to be. And I ask questions a lot. I ask questions about the people whether I'm working with or meeting or talking to, and they tell us the stuff that people tell you is you couldn't even write. And so that's why I think reality is weirder than we could ever be. And if we aggregate those stories and we distill them in our own brain, that makes us more interesting as conversationalists. And that adds to our story.
No doubt. Well, you know what you're going to have to share now, Stewart, now that you opened up that can of worms. You're going to have to share some of the crazy stories that you've heard. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. You might need a few moments to think about it, but we want to hear some of those crazy stories. Of course, the names can be changed to protect the innocent, and they probably should. But yeah, let's hear some of those crazy stories that you've been involved in and that you've been able to tell, because I think that might inspire people to maybe feel like their stories aren't so crazy and people actually want to hear them.
Put it this way, you could never be crazy enough. Okay, here's one, and this is and it's neither here nor there, but we were filming something at a hotel property in Las Vegas, and we were doing something about their staff, some of the employees, and so I'm asking questions, and you know how some people wear their name and where they're from, when they work in hotels. And so of course I'm just I'm grasping for something to talk about, right? And I'm like, oh, so you're from Colorado? How interesting! Like, what part? And this woman says to me, well, I'm not really from Colorado. I was born in Colorado, but I didn't really live there. I'm like, oh, so how long were you there? She said, well, actually, my parents were on the run from the law, and I was born at a rest stop in Colorado. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm like, so where are your parents now? It's like, well, oh, my mom killed my dad and she's in prison. And it's like, but that's just one that pops to my head. But it's like, you can't make that stuff up, And so that's what I mean. But that's her reality. And that's what she knows. And, and it's not up to us to cast judgment on anybody. It's just, hey, okay, that's cool,
So are you telling me that story didn't make it into the commercial for that hotel chain?
No. And most of them don't. Most of them don't. But sometime if I ever write some whacked out crazy book or something, it'll be in there.
Oh man, I bet. What a great experience. So it sounds like you have come up with questions over the years that you add to your sort of tool belt to get story out of people.
I just turn the filter off. I think one thing with me and my crews have commented on this throughout the years is when I have a camera, I kind of feel like you could ask anything. And, even though you're a stranger, but I kind of, it creates this immediate connection. And the other thing that we've learned is when people are on the other side of the camera and they get questions like that, they just open up. People want to talk. People really want to talk. And yeah, so I think that just became my MO. And I'm an extrovert at heart. Like I could walk into a room and make conversation with people. And I want to hear about them. I don't want to talk about me.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think I've noticed that to be true as well. Everybody loves talking about themselves, right? They are their favorite character.
Yeah.
So, the interview process is a big component in the storytelling work that you do. Talk to me about how, our audience could maybe start that process themselves. And then, of course, as you recommended, the outcome is always better if you get an expert involved. Some people are going to want to try it on their own, right? So
Sure.
what are some of the questions that they might ask themselves, or potentially have somebody ask them to go from having a blank piece of paper to
Sure.
maybe an outline of their story, or maybe to find some interesting bits about their story to share?
Well, okay, I'm gonna take that question and turn it on its head for a sec, because as we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking, well, no, if you're a high-end builder working with, individual families, it's up to you to find out what makes them tick. And a lot of times, I just happen to come from a nice part of Dallas where we've had experiences with some builders and stuff like that. They want to tell you what they want to do and how they do it and what their process is, which is great. But nobody's ever flipped it around and asked the homeowner or the, prospective client, you know, what their story is and what do they want and where is that really coming from? Like, why do you want light coming in the morning as opposed to in the afternoon? You know, and I think for your audience, that's important, because if you understood really what's driving their desire to build this, whether it's a home or a pool or a entertainment center, I mean, I think you could right there, you could distill it down and you could probably come back day one with a solid solution.
I love that.
Yeah.
So understand their perspective, understand their story, and that helps in the sales process. It's absolutely something that we've seen to be true. What about the exercise of when a business wants to share its story from a marketing perspective? So let's talk a little bit about that. When they want to distill, maybe before we go into that, you brought up a case study. So earlier you talked about hotels. You brought up a case study where you were working with a major hotel brand, and there was a very big difference in their business outcomes based on the storytelling you did. So let's go deep on that, Stewart. Talk to me, share with our audience as much
Yeah.
detail as you can about that
Sure.
experience and how
Sure.
how the storytelling and the work that you did changed the business outcomes.
Well, yes. Yeah, so the one thing that I don't ever normally see are the results of what we do. You know, so if a client comes and spends X amount of dollars, I don't see their ROI on it. But somebody that used to work here ended up working for a big hotel brand, one of the big couple, and being in their photography department and working with individual properties on their photography and telling them what they need, what's required for the website. And don't forget, and this goes back, I mean, this spans about 10 years as really the web became, call it even from 2010 to 2015, 16, and even to now, how if your property doesn't look good on the website, people aren't going there. Photography is the number one thing, or video, whatever it may be. And they were trying to sell the individual. So how most hotel groups work is the actual buildings are owned by somebody. And a lot of times these days it's private equity. and then they have the big brand management. And so it's up to the private equity groups or the owners of the property to provide all the assets to the hotel brand to market the properties. And people try to cheap out on the photography, and what they found is the quality of the photography impacted the ROI or your occupancy rate immediately, like exponentially. And no matter what they were trying to explain to these owners, they couldn't convince them that if you invest in great creative content, it will pay it'll pay multiple. And that was the first time that somebody told me that they really saw the ROI like that. And it makes total sense because also if you're booking a hotel room today, you're looking at the website. Everybody's looking at the website. There's no question. So if there are two hotels next to each other and one room pictures look better than the other and they're the same price, you're going for the better picture. So it makes a difference. And I think if you're one of your listeners, builder, pool fabricator, whatever it may be, people are looking at your website first. And they're going to dig in, and sometimes they look, never mind your website, they're going to look at your social. They might look at any other links they could find about you, the owner, or about the company. They're going to look for accolades, or they're going to look for complaints. And so it's really up to us to paint an authentic, real picture, because people will see it today. There's no hiding like there used to be. And I do think that even if you're a middle market player, it's okay to admit, look, we play in this space, and this is what we want to own. So, right there, yes, it might turn away the high-end buyer, it might turn away the low-end buyer, but you're going to get what you're asking for. Same thing on the high-end buyer. If you somehow say, our average pool starts at X, if a consumer is looking to spend, half of that, they're not going to call you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that case study, and I think it lands really well for our audience because what you just stated has been true in my observation, that when you cheap out on video or photography or any documentation of the work that you do, your potential clients see that, and it becomes obvious that you cheaped out. And your hotel example lands with me because I travel a ton, as you do, and I look at those photos. If there's one shot of the room and I can't get a perspective on how big the room is, or what the bathroom's like, or whatever, just depending on what kind of travel I'm doing. Or I mean, a perfect example is the gym, right? Some of these hotels have really nice gyms. Most of them don't. If there's not a picture of the gym, I'm not staying there because I need to at least exercise in the morning, right? So the same is true.
There's the case. I'm sure you've seen this too. When you check into a hotel and you're like, oh man, I've been duped. I mean, there was a lot of retouching in that photography. But I mean, okay, so they got you there that time, but they're never getting you again, and you'll never recommend that to people,
Totally.
So that's nearly, you got one night out of me, but I might tell 5 people and you might lose 5 more. It's because you weren't authentic, you weren't true, you weren't honest,
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think what's really interesting as you're sharing this, what comes up for me, and I'd love to get your opinion on, is in this world of AI, we talk about, creative content or leading with content. And, I think that luxury home service providers are uniquely positioned to put out incredible creative content. Many of them don't do it. So if you take 50 of these home service providers, you might have a couple who have really great online presences, but most of the 50 have projects that are worthy of showing off, right?
Right.
And so when we think about AI and content, I think we've all been we've all seen the written content from AI is pretty good. It's hard to differentiate on the written side. But the video and the still pictures it's now very obvious. I'm sure it won't be down the road, but it's currently very obvious when AI creates those images or those videos. So my point here is there's maybe a window of opportunity, and this is a hypothesis I'd love to get your opinion on. There may be a window of opportunity for these luxury home service providers to actually document their work in a really high quality way and tell their story in a high quality way before maybe AI makes that more difficult and less valuable, like it's happening with written content. So tell me more about what you see in the future for these luxury home service providers and what they should be doing today to take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I do think that AI is the conversation that everybody's having today, and it can do some amazing things. But again, like the example we're using about the hotel room that wasn't really what it was set up to be. You know, if you need to be real, you need to be authentic. I mean, I would rather see a picture of your finished project, or even progress pictures, or maybe a case study on your website about this was the backyard, this was the task, this is what went into it, and we decided to build the pool 75 feet because we didn't want to interrupt the trees, so we didn't go 80 feet. Just something like that it makes people want to know your story. I mean, more and more, you could sell somebody on your website today if you're authentic and true and you show good content. And you could also turn people off as well. But I think if you tell the story and you show them the real stuff, because they might want to go see it, I mean, once you start faking stuff with AI, I mean, and it's going to happen. We all know that. But once the cat's out of the bag there, I mean, nobody's going to know what to believe. And I feel that way already, which is, we're going to have a tumultuous couple of years with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason I'm asking the question isn't so much from the perspective of, I don't think any of the luxury home service providers that are listening to this podcast are thinking about faking. But what's happened to written content is it's become more difficult to differentiate because of AI. And right now, that's not the case with visual content. And so I guess my question more was, and maybe it's different. Maybe we have a whole bunch of luxury home service providers who are on the sidelines. They know, like 100% of them know they should be doing this video and still photos, high quality, doing it well. By and large, most of them are not doing it. They're just not doing it. So for those who are sitting on the sidelines, if we could hypothesize, why do you think, from your perspective, having gone through the whole process, why do you think they're not doing it?
I don't know. I don't know, because, unless, look, I know that in that space, a lot of those people are in high demand. I will say that. You just know from anything we've ever tried to do, yeah, we could get you in 6 months. So if you're in that high demand and you're always busy, it's one of those things that you don't feel like you have to do. I think a lot of businesses have to do that when they're starting and when they're younger. And really, the best thing to do is continue to do it, because you never know when you're going to really need to have that presentation. So I don't know why they're not doing it. I've always thought the marketing was important. I deal on more of a national level, and it's like, how do I get to people? You need to have your face needs to be shown there. And I also, my philosophy on marketing, and this is a good one to take away, is you think about it at the end of your story, at the end of your career, at the end of your run with your business, you don't ever want to look back and say, what if? What if I had a great marketing presence? I might have gotten to do the White House, or whatever, not necessarily that house, but a better house. So you never want to say what if. So I think, and also the other thing I really feel is important is it's always good to aggregate your work and look at it objectively. And
Yeah.
there's never a better time to do it than when you're doing marketing. You're like, oh, what have we done? So we see some trade ads that we do to our industry, and we're always looking at recent work. And in my head, I always think, oh, it's all great. It's all great. It's all great. And then you're looking at it and you're like, oh, do I really want to use that to promote myself? So it drives you to be better also. I think looking at your work over and over and over drives you to be better.
I love that perspective. It's like a reflection on what you're doing, because if you're not proud to take pictures or videos of it, maybe it's time to rethink about, what you're doing.
Exactly. And somebody once said to me, I don't know if he said it exactly like this, but just say you're sitting on an airplane, you fly a lot. You're sitting next to Mick Jagger and he's like, hey, what do you do? And you have like 45 seconds to show him what you do. Think about that. And you could replace Mick Jagger with anybody, whatever.
Yep, no doubt. That's a great point. I love that. I think you brought up a very interesting point about why the home service providers are not doing this work. I think they're busy. And my takeaway from what you said is, I think there's two things at play there. And again, love to get your opinion. I think they're too busy, so they don't feel that devoting time towards this would be valuable. And therefore, they just don't have the time to actually do the work, right? So if you told them, hey, I need you to take pictures of every job, they'd be like, I don't have time for that. So there's an actual time constraint. And then the other piece, which I think you brought up, is very valid. They don't feel like they need to do it because they're getting all the leads. They're getting all the leads they want, which we know is cyclical, right? But also, if you're that busy, chances are you're buying projects, meaning your prices are too low, right? And so what does a business model look like when you price your projects appropriately? Yes, you might be a little less busy. Yes, you might lose a few jobs, but you're actually now leveling up in the types of projects you're doing because you're documenting them in a high quality way. So from your perspective as a marketer, again, this is just a hypothesis, but as a marketer, I mean, it's kind of true because we've seen it happen, but from your perspective as a marketer, is that likely to happen as you start documenting your projects in a higher quality way, that you will attract more and more high quality projects, which will allow you to ratchet up your pricing?
Absolutely. No question. And plus you're creating a name out in the world, as opposed to just, your leads that you're getting from other people. And just say, for instance, there becomes a slowdown for whatever reason. That's not the time to start marketing. When you're slow is not the time. You need to be you need that low roar happening all the time. And hopefully that's keeping your pipeline full. And if so, you could play with your prices so it manages your workflow that way. And I think without the consistent marketing, you'll never have that. And how to do it if somebody's super busy, and this is the challenging part, I will give you this, is finding the right partner to help you through it. And that takes some homework. I really do think so. Because if you find the right partner, whether it be a digital marketing agency, an ad agency, or just a small graphic designer, it could be whatever. It could be somebody or again, somebody you got from a referral, and you let them come up with a plan for you. And you don't move forward until you really believe in the plan. And it needs to be a plan that has legs too. It can't be a plan that is a snapshot of you today. It has to be a plan that has a structure that you could continually add your new projects to. So it needs to be able to really be in a fluid program in motion, and you figure that every 5 years you're going to have to redo that. And because I really think you could keep a site now, 4 or 5 years, but you have to be able to continually upload new content to it. And then you get into, if you want to do social and all that stuff. But again, that depends. If you're aiming at a super, super high market, you got to find out where your people live and move in those circles. But that's what I feel, you got to find a good partner to help you move forward and to create a platform that is continually with the ability to continually evolve.
I love that. And what a great segue, because I was going to ask the question about, there's Dan Sullivan has a great book, Who Not How, right? So you figure out who's going to do the work, not how do we do the work. And I think in the world of luxury home service businesses, we get so wrapped up in how am I going to do this? I
Right.
know I need to be on socials. I know I need better content. So how do I do it? What you're suggesting, and I absolutely am an advocate for, especially in this case, go find the who. Who's going to do this work for me? So let's dive in a little bit deeper, because I think that can feel like a daunting task, especially for somebody who's never done that work before. Here's what we know to be true about our audience. They love to be the experts, right? And most of them have done all of the jobs in their business. And therefore, when they go to hire for that role, whether it's a screw turner or a ditch digger or whatever the case may be, like, I've done that before. I know what good looks like. I can hire for that role.
Right.
But in this case, they've never done this work before. So talk to us about how would they, what are some of the best practices for finding a partner to help them with this?
I think you're throwing down a business opportunity there, Matt. That's a really good question, and that's a challenging one, actually, because there are a lot of people with shingles out that say they could deliver the world. There really are. Obviously, word of mouth is important. If you have, people in your circle that use, because I sense you don't need a big company to do it. It could be like a small marketing company. So, if you have friends, maybe the other parents, from your kids' schools, somebody's in that world, or, somebody that has a store and has a website, just ask around and say, hey, any, a small marketing company that could help me do this. And then do your homework, and, you could look in your, obviously in your geography for somebody like that. And I think before you do any phone calls, I would really dig into your own online research, and it doesn't take that long. And just find the companies. And again, are their sites authentic? Do they tell the story of who they are and why they're good and what they bring? And so before you even make the phone call to have an initial meeting with them, you kind of get a sense of who they are and who their clients are. So when they sit down across the table from you, there's a familiarity you have already. And I think that's a good way to do it. And honestly, you have a daughter going to school. We met so many people, like, not being from Texas, and my wife's not from Texas. And we had a lot of friends here that I met through the advertising world. And when we had kids that were about to go to school, my insurance agent, who was an older guy, he said, no, that school's great. You're going to make all your best friends there. And I'm like, that's not true. We're having kids and I'm already like an adult. It's like, I already have my friends. He's like, mark my words. And sure enough, my kids are at college now. And it's like, sure enough, our best friends were made through the people you meet at school. And through that, I made business connections. And it's not like you're there hustling work, but it's just like, hey, I know so-and-so does this. Let me call them. Or I know so-and-so does this. So just, really start working your network.
I love that. What a great suggestion, right? There's probably people in your circle who do this work.
Absolutely.
Now, you brought up, small versus large, and I can tell you our listeners are, broad, right? So some of them are startups, others are $50 million organizations. So depending on where you are size-wise, might be the right fit. And ultimately, I think the challenge for them is going to be determining what quality is right for their size. Do you have any suggestions on how they can assess, whether it's an agency or a production company that they're working with, how they can assess the quality for their size? Is it simply just budget related? Like, hey, how much can you afford? Or are there some other things that...
Well, obviously, like, and I don't know, this, like, a $50 million company is substantial, So, I'm sure a company of that size needs to market to a larger swath, and which might require a bigger company to manage it, depending on what they're trying to do. I mean, I was thinking, you guys were like, I don't know, well, depending on how you figure out the gross, like, people that are working on a couple of houses at a time, and so it's a smaller, like a bespoke business, that there's actually still the relationships, like one to one, because you're working on their home. Whereas it seems like if it's a $50 million company, I don't know if that would translate. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. It's a larger organization that still has that bespoke feel. And again, some of the $50 million companies are, obviously they have very different organizational structures than a $10
Yeah.
million company. But, what we see generally is that an organizational spend between, let's say, 1% and 3%, sometimes above 3% in revenue on marketing, right? So, if you look at a $1 million organization, right, that would be $10,000 to $30,000 a year in marketing. If you look at a $10 million organization, that's $100,000 to $300,000 a year in
Right.
marketing, and so there can be vastly different budgets from one to the other. But I think what we're advocating for, you and I, and sort of Vital and everybody, is that when they invest in better storytelling and they invest in better video and still picture production, they're going to grow, right? You've
Right.
seen it over and over again. We've certainly seen it. And so it's one of those investments that might be hard to attribute. So you're not going to say, oh, that photo generated, that phone call generated that sale. But
Right.
you're going to see an improvement in the quality of your projects. We see it over and over again. You already have seen it, for decades in your business. So I guess the question is, where would they start in finding that right partner, and what are some additional suggestions you have for them?
Well, the amount of money spent is funny. I guess I got some bad information early on in my career, because I heard, and I still remember, I was at some seminar and somebody had mentioned that you need to spend 10% of your gross on marketing. To me, at least, and I took that to heart. And I've been known in our industry as the guy that has spent, has been everywhere. Like, in terms of, I was on the back cover of trade magazines, and I made sure I was visible, and maybe I overspent. And I have other friends, this is interesting, especially in the context here, other friends who have said to me, and sometimes I think about them, who said, yeah, when you were spending $10,000 on an ad, I was putting a down payment on a rental house, and I now have 25 rental houses. And and looking back now, I'm like, maybe he was onto something. So I invested in myself, maybe too much, but I do think it helped propel my career it helped me maintain longer. I've been going. There are a lot of guys that have fallen to the wayside by the time they've been in business as long as I have. So I feel like that's really helped. I like telling my story. I think it's important. I think people want to work with people that are like-minded. And if they really love your aesthetic, they're going to come work with you. They're going to want you to do their work. And I think you have to prove that. And I think that's something you have to continue to prove. And, I think, look at your world. Okay, totally different end of the market. But I've done work for Chip and Joanna Gaines. So how did they create that? Right? That was like marketing genius. How did they put Waco, Texas, which was kind of a backwater town, they put it on the map? And you should see their organization there now. It's insane. And that's all marketing. That's all being really smart and telling a lot of stories. And some might say it was too much, but who are we to say? So the point being, that's an extreme. I'm happy I thought of that, because it's a good example, really. They made a TV show. Why can't you make a video series of Matt's pools, and every time you do a pool, you do a kind of you create a formula and you tell the story of the pool, and then you push that out there. That lives on YouTube forever. And when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm looking to do a pool, And you could say, well, here's this channel, like, and here, I'll put together a link for you, and you got 5 episodes of Matt's pools, and they're going to look at it and they're like, okay, well, he's our guy. I mean, the conversation is over at that point. You sold it.
Yep. That
So,
lead nurture is so incredibly important. I love that you brought up Chip and Joanna Gaines because it goes full circle to what you advocated initially in storytelling, which is authenticity. Now, I don't know them personally, but they seem very authentic on their show and everything they do, right? And that may be a ruse, I don't know. But at least they feel authentic. I think people connect with that level of authenticity. And so how do you, in the work that you do, I'm very curious, actually, as the guy on the other side of the camera, and you probably don't even know the talent very well or whatever story you're telling by that time. How do you ensure authenticity, or how do you measure authenticity as the storyteller?
well, I think you strive to get there. You ask the right questions, you go off topic, you bring back the topic. You hope a lot of that happens in the editing when you're doing a video, because there's a lot of stuff, banter that we're talking about that may never make the final cut, but you might come out with something really brilliant that's like, okay, that's real, you know. And I think that's where working with a good director, and not to toot my own horn, but working with a good director really comes in handy, because that's, you know, it's up to me to get it out of the subject. That's my job. And that truly, when it boils down to everything, that is my job. Because there are a lot of people that could do what I do, that do what I do. And yet we still have to stay one step ahead of them, you know. And to circle back to your comment about Chip and Joanna, I've worked with them a couple times, and they're pretty believable, you know. I mean, if they have a story, and whether they stick to it or, I think it's real. And you have to admire it, you know, because they've come up with this chemistry that really resonated with people. And the other thing, if you think about it, and they didn't deviate from it. That's the one thing I think we see happening a lot, you know. Like, you could say you're a home builder, it's like, you know, oh, there's Matt, the traditional home builder. And once you have some success, it's like, oh, Matt's going into uber contemporary houses now. It's like, people, I hate to say this, but people want to put you in a box, you know. So I think everybody who's creative, and really, people should evolve over their career. And I think by documenting your career, you could see the evolution. And I think that makes your story even more interesting, because at that point, you could tell a story about, you know, this is the arc of my career, and how, you know, you notice how the lines became softer and da da da. You know, you could weave something into it, and it becomes authentic.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we've talked about all of the things you should do and how you should do them right. Let's get a little dirty, Stewart. Let's talk about some of the mistakes that you've made in your journey, some of the things that you've learned from, because we've all made mistakes. What are some of the ugly things that have happened in your journey that have shaped where you are today from your, you know, quality and professionalism?
Okay, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are experienced, and I'm experienced too. And I don't know how many people still, every now and then, realize that they're still learning lessons. I mean, every mistake that has been made in production or in marketing, I've probably made. But what I've been able to do is rectify them and make it right. And say to myself, I can't believe what an amateur error. And I don't have specific things, but one happened recently, and it's just like, okay, I never stop learning, you know. And the thing with what I do, of course, is technology keeps changing, and camera technology, and this and that, you know. So sometimes, like, all those menus get nuts, and I'm like, okay, I should know this, you know. But we grow from our mistakes, we learn from our mistakes, and you just got to take them in stride. And when you do make a mistake, own up to it immediately and say you're going to fix it. And especially from what your guys do, your listeners do as well, I mean, you got to own up to it. I mean, so many, you've seen, like we've had all these construction projects over the years, and you see people try to pass off stuff that was not what they thought it was supposed to be. And, sometimes guys are go way beyond, above and beyond, which is awesome, and you want to call them back. And sometimes people try to sweep stuff under the mat, and it never works long term.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I'm going to push you a little bit harder because authenticity has come up a number of times in our conversation today. It's what our viewers and listeners expect. I know the top one or two most painful mistakes, and in the spirit of authenticity, just talk about them. And what did you learn from those? Look, I'll lead. This whole podcasting thing, we've been doing it for about a year and a half. We've made plenty of mistakes. One of the biggest was forgetting to hit the record button. Like literally going through an entire podcast, forgetting to hit the record button. And when we've carved out our own time and now literally wasted the time of a guest, and we had to rebook that guest. That's painful, right? So, that's my taking the lead on authenticity. And look, it didn't kill us. It was one of those like holy shit moments. So lay some on us, man. What have you learned over the years, Stewart?
I was on a podcast, the first podcast I was ever a guest on years ago. That same thing happened. And we recorded it, and it's just like we recorded it a couple weeks later and it was fine. Okay, here's one. And this is recent. And so normally when you're recording sound, everything's at 24 frames a second. So your frame rate on your camera is 24 frames a second, and then the audio syncs at 24 frames a second. So a client requested that we film something at 30 frames a second, which is that's what broadcast used to be as opposed to film. And we said, sure, So we set the camera to 30 frames a second, and we come back and there's no audio. Like the audio is just non-existent, but we know we recorded the audio, but it's not synced in. And I'm like, what the heck, And so of course with a little digging, it's like, okay, well, was the there? Not to get technical, but there's a project setting in the camera as well. And the project setting was still set at 24 frames a second. So we shot it at 30 frames, but it came in at 24, so it didn't sync the sound. So we had to go back and I don't know how we ended up doing it, but rerun the audio to sync at 30 frames a second. And then manually line it up on a timeline. And we had to do all that, of course, without the client knowing. Yeah. So that's one. I'm like, okay, what an amateur mistake. What an amateur mistake.
Right. And it was probably made because obviously it was a change to make a customer happy that was outside of your normal protocol, right?
Right.
And I think our listeners can absolutely identify with that because it happens all the time in construction. Hey, you know what? I know you guys normally do this at 12 feet. Can you do it at 13 feet? And all of a sudden it lands at 12 feet because that's just how our brain is locked in, right?
Great.
I love that you shared that for a couple of reasons. Here's a few takeaways from my observation.
Okay.
I learned something about your business. It is not as easy as just clicking record on the camera, right?
Correct.
So, that's what I did today when I started this podcast. I clicked record. So in my tiny little world, your job is as easy as my job was today. I clicked the record button, right? So you shared with me not only your lesson learned, but also you shared with me some of the complexity in your business. And I think the reason that's valuable for me and then also for our listeners is I guarantee you our customers or our potential customers have no idea how complex the work is that we do. And when we share some of that through story, which is what you're really good at, or through just being authentic and sharing our failures, people begin to recognize like, hey, you know what? This business is not as easy as I thought it was. Just screwing a TV on the wall and hitting power. So I love that. Thank you, Stewart, for sharing that with us.
Sure. But yeah, and just like, you could go to YouTube, tells you how to screw a TV on the wall and turn it on, and it might work. And just like you could press record and it's going to work. So the difference between what I'm striving to do, just like your listeners are striving to do, is we're trying to be better. We're trying to be the best, and we're trying to create this top echelon of work that everyone will appreciate. And I think that's the one area that will not go away with AI. The top level, true craftsmanship, and integrity is never going to go away.
Yep, totally agree. Well, let's wrap this up with some action items. If you are running a home services business, you've just listened to this podcast, you're intrigued about what to do next. Like all of them know they need to do a better job with media. What are the 3 most basic next steps that you would suggest them take?
1, look around and find competitors whose work you like, whose work you think, I really like what they're doing, but you're better than them, of course, because that's everybody. Then try to find some resources, people that could help you create a program. And take your time doing it. I don't think this is something you need to rush into. Take your time doing it, figure out a budget, really dig deep, just, do some trolling on your computer or on your phone and try to figure out who you want to be. What do you want to show to the world? And even if, like we were talking about traditional versus contemporary, like maybe you want to change. Maybe you're known for doing one thing, but you want to change. So you could have a whole program just about your evolution, and it's not going to happen overnight. In 5 years, it will, if you say it will. But you need to put the wheels in motion and document your work and keep a history of your work. Keep it handy so people could see it. I think when you start catering now to the younger buyers, who is happening already, if not now, it will tomorrow, people that are making money that are digital natives who grew up with media like at their fingertips, you're going to need to sell to that group. You need to sell to digital natives. Think about that. Think about who your client's going to be in 10 years.
Yep.
They're not boomers. They're not Gen X. They're Gen Z.
Yep. Love that. Great recommendations. All right, cool. Stewart. So as we wrap up, why don't you share with our audience how they can get a hold of you? It sounds like you might be a potential opportunity for them to work with on some of the production stuff, depending on what their needs are, but also, just to stay in touch with the work that you're doing. How can they reach you?
Absolutely. And thanks for that. Well, obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just Stewart Cohen at LinkedIn, or Stewart Cohen Pictures. My website's scpictures.com. And it has all our contact information on there. My email's on there. It's right on the front page. And you could always shoot me an email if you have any questions and just say, you heard it on the Flywheel, and I'll get right back in touch with you.
That's awesome. Real quick, as we end every show, if you enjoyed the podcast, you got something from it, you were entertained, or you just like to share things with your friends, please make sure to share this podcast. Also, drop in a review. It's super simple, takes a minute. Just, give us 5 stars, of course, because I'm sure that's the quality we're putting out today. But like, review, and subscribe so you can get some more great content. So Stewart, thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Matt. Talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Flywheel Effect. Our journey through the intricate world of luxury home services continues to be fueled by your passion for excellence and innovation. If you found value in our conversations today, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. More insights and resources, visit us online at growwithvital.com. Until next time.